Hello and thanks for joining me. It is a very wet day today, and so I'm in the workshop. I had planned to go for a ride, but I'm in the workshop catching up with a few jobs. And what I want to do in this video is talk about buying a classic bike. And I'm going to walk you through a list of what I consider to be the most important things that you need to check if you go to have a look at a classic bike with a view to buying it. I have prepared a checklist. This is actually a 3-page typed up checklist, and this is what I'm going to be going through today. And I will make this available for you to download for free from my Buy Me a Coffee account. There will be a link to this document on my Buy Me a Coffee account in the description to this video. Can I just emphasize, it is free. You don't have to buy me a coffee. So, if you just want to go onto the Buy Me a Coffee account, there's plenty of other resources I've made available there, and they're all free because I believe in, sharing the love, encouraging other people with motorcycling. However, if you do download the list and you appreciate the time and effort that I've put into both preparing the list and producing this video, then obviously I would appreciate you buying me a coffee. I love coffee. I'm actually not buying a new bike, so what I'm going to do is use my own bike, my Triumph Bonneville T140, as an example, and we'll have a look at that as if we come to view the bike with a view to buying it. Now, just before I start, I just want to say a couple of important things. This video and the checklist that I've produced for you to download is very much focused on buying a classic bike. However, it will still be relevant if you are just looking at a second-hand, more modern bike. There are a couple of notable, significant points that I would want to make if you were looking at a second-hand bike, and I'll come back to those at the end of the video. So let's have a look at my Triumph Bonneville T140 as if we were going to buy it. Now, if you go and have a look at a bike, there's a couple of things which I recommend you take with you. One is a pair of rubber gloves, because if you're poking around and handling the bike and it's maybe got some grease oil on it or it's not so clean, and you haven't got facilities to wash your hands, it's useful just to be able to put some gloves on and then take them off afterwards. Also, it's useful to take a small torch or flashlight with you, and then you can have a good peek into the recesses, inside the tank, around the back of the engine, things like that, and that will maybe help you pick up things which otherwise you wouldn't be able to see. Okay, so let's start with the checklist and start having a look at my Bonneville T140. I was prompted to make this video after a conversation a couple of days ago with a friend. I was out on this bike, the Bonneville T140, and he was looking at it and he said, "Oh, I'd love to buy a classic bike, but I'm just not confident about buying one. I'm worried that I'm going to buy a lemon." And so I should point out that this checklist won't guarantee that you don't buy a lemon, because if you have a seller who's deliberately trying to hide some things from you, or there's some issues, internal issues with the bike that are not immediately obvious, then there's still that risk there. So this is not a comprehensive, but it's a pretty thorough checklist, is this. And I think if you go through this list, you are likely to pick up most of the potential problems. You can then use those either to evaluate whether you just want to walk away from the deal and you're not interested in the bike, or they can then become leverage points for negotiating on the price if you found issues that you're not happy about with the bike. It's also worth mentioning that if you are going to have a look at a classic bike, you should do your homework before you go along. It really helps if you know your way around the bike a little bit. If you don't know anything about them, then try and take a friend with you who is familiar with the bikes, preferably one who's owned or owns the same bike, because that will help you pick up on things. So if you're going to do a bit of research, research on known issues, known problems with that particular bike. If you take somebody with you who is familiar with the bikes, it really helps on, just little details of things, like, for example, stuff that you may not pick up yourself if you don't know. So Yeah, for example, picking up that the carburetors on the bike are wrong for that particular model or that particular year, or picking up the modifications or changes that have been done, different handlebars, different petrol tank, things like that. Now, that may or may not be important to you, depending on why you're buying the bike and what sort of thing you're looking for. But again, it's just a case of actually identifying these things, and being aware of what it is that you're potentially buying. If you go through this checklist systematically and efficiently, it should only take you 15-20 minutes to run through the whole checklist, and that is definitely time well spent. So I would start off by asking to see the ownership document, and making sure that the person selling has an ownership document in their own name. And the first thing you want to check on that is that the frame number and the engine number match the ownership document. You'd be surprised how many don't, on older classic bikes. So you need to know where the frame number is. I mean, obviously you can ask the owner if you're not sure. But also another thing to look at is if I just come in here with my torch and just show you the on my bike here, on the engine here stamped just at the bottom of the barrel on the crankcase there. Two things. One is, it tells you the model there, T140E, and then it's got the engine number. But you can see that there's also the Triumph logo stamped on that as well, which means that if somebody tries to grind the original numbers off and restamp them, they'll lose those Triumph logos. So that's a sort of extra security measure on these bikes. Another thing you should try and do is check that the frame is aligned. And these, I haven't got room here because I'm in my workshop and it's tipping down with rain outside. But get the bike on the centre stand, as I have here, and then get at the back of the bike and try and look and check that the two wheels are aligned. Get down low, right down here, and peer up through the lower half of the back wheel and see if you can see if the back wheel and the front wheel are aligned. See if I can get the camera down. So you're trying to get right in here and checking that the two wheels align, and that gives some indication if there's a twist in the frame, any damage to the frame. Likewise, check the down tubes. If we come round here, the steering head, the down tubes, for any evidence of accident damage there, dents or cracks or evidence of welding or replacement there. And then generally go over the rest of the frame that you can see. And obviously you can lift up the seat to check underneath the seat and have a look down the side of the panels. And you're just looking generally for the condition of the frame there. Check for any evidence of cracks or on the welds in particular, or any evidence of repair to welds. And then also for any corrosion. Now, on an older bike, you would expect some corrosion, but the issue is how bad is it? Has it penetrated? Is it just surface corrosion? Has it penetrated, which would damage the structural integrity of the frame? Having checked the frame, I would next move on to the engine, and as I've already suggested, you need to check the engine numbers, make sure they match the logbook, that they don't look like they've been altered, and that they correspond with the frame. If possible, with an older bike, it could have a replacement engine, but you need to know that you're buying that, because for many bikes that will impact on the value of the bike if the engine and the frame don't match. You then need to visually inspect the whole engine, and you're looking for things like broken cooling fins, if any of the cooling fins are broken, or there's evidence that they've been broken and repaired. There's any damage to any covers, any of the covers, or the nuts and bolts, things have been rounded off by some poor mechanic, damaged there. What you're looking for there really is evidence of ham-fisted, incompetent mechanicking, because if you see things like that on the surface, on the outside of the bike, then what about the internals that you can't see? It's a warning sign, is that. Also check the engine casings for damage or evidence of welding repairs. If there's been an accident, there's a hole being punctured in the casing. And also check the joints as well, and what you're looking there for is evidence of fresh silicone sealer, that maybe somebody's piled a load of silicone sealer in to stop the engine from leaking oil just when you come in and have a look at it. I would also suggest, if you are going to have a look at a bike, to tell the seller not to start the bike before you get there. It's important that you see the bike with the engine cold, because you need to see the bike starting from cold. So if you arrive, feel the engine, and if it's warm, you know that the owner has, run it before you got there, and that may be to hide a problem with a cold start. So, having visually inspected the engine, I suggest then that you turn the engine over with the kickstart to assess the compression and also whether the clutch is slipping. And also, so just gently kick the engine, without the ignition on, just kick the engine over gently a couple of times. And you're also checking for a full smooth movement of the Kickstarter all the way through its movement, and a smooth return of the Kickstarter, back to its original position. Then I suggest you start the bike, or if you're not familiar with the bike, you're not confident, ask the owner to start the bike, and it should start within 2 or 3 kicks. If it doesn't start after a few kicks, then there is clearly a problem. And you need to be asking yourself why is it not starting? When it does start up, look out for smoke from the exhaust immediately on startup. This could be a sign of worn valve sleeves or worn piston rings, because then there's evidence that oil has got through into the combustion chamber, and that's burning off immediately as you start it. Also, listen to the engine. Once the engine's started up, and obviously give it a minute or two to warm up, have a listen to the engine. Now, you have to be aware, if you're used to modern bikes, old engines, and particularly British bikes, are noisy. They're going to be a lot more noisier than most modern bikes. But what you're listening out for is evidence of noises that you just feel shouldn't be there. So, evidences of things knocking or binding, or, things like warm bearings, things like that. Obviously, if you're not too experienced, it's difficult to recognise such sounds, which is why it's maybe worth taking somebody a little bit more experienced with you. Then also, with the bike running, remove the oil tank cap and check that the oil is returning. This being a T140, the oil tank is obviously in the frame here, in the down tube of the frame, so this is the oil filler cap. So you take that off with the engine running, and you should be able to see the feed which comes back through here, returning the oil to the oil tank. Don't worry about removing the oil cap, and if it's an older bike with the oil tank at the side, same issue. Don't worry about removing the oil cap with the engine running. Oil isn't going to spray out everywhere, because the return will just be going through. Whilst you're having a look in the oil tank as well, have a look, check the oil level to make sure the oil level is right, and look at the condition of the oil. Does it look fairly new, or does it look like very old black oil? Because again, that's another pointer at lack of maintenance or poor maintenance. With the engine running, so again, whilst it's still running, check the exhaust as well. Check the whole exhaust, all the way from the headers all the way around, and particularly joins like this, to make sure that there's no leakage. Check underneath the silencers that there's no corrosion and leakage there. And then also check the engine for oil leaks. The engine, look underneath the engine for fresh oil leaks. Now, one presumes that if it does have an oil leak, the seller would probably try and hide the evidence by wiping any old oil off. But if there is old oil there, it's a sign of an oil leak. But you can't hide fresh oil coming out with the engine started, so have a look for that as well. It is worth continuing to look for oil leaks, check for oil leaks after the bike has stopped as well. So if you've got the bike running for 5 minutes or so whilst you're checking over these things I've just talked about, continue to check for oil leaks as you look at other things, and after you've checked the other things, because oil may not leak out immediately, but it may start to leak out a little while after the engine has stopped as well. Right, so that covers the engine. Let's move on and talk about the wheels, the front and the rear wheels. So you want to check them physically. So check the rims and the spokes for rust. Check the rims, and again, this is where a bit of knowledge helps. Are they original rims or are they replacement rims? If they're replacement rims, particularly if they're replacement stainless rims, that's not necessarily an issue. But again, it's just a case of knowing what it is that you are buying. And then Check for any missing spokes or loose spokes. You can check for loose spokes by simply going round with something and tapping the spokes and listening to the sound of them. And a loose spoke will have a dull sound. It won't ring out. And then spin the wheel to make sure that it is true. So you need to get the wheel off the ground if you can, and actually give the front wheel a spin. At the same time, that helps you assess whether the brakes are binding as well. But you'll be able to see if there's any wobble on it, if there's any, if the rim is out of true, particularly if it's a spoked wheel. And then check the wheel bearings as well. So in order to do that, you need to grab the wheel at the top and the bottom and try and move it sideways and see if there's any sideways movement. Are you moving it towards you and away from you? Just trying to move that, and there should be no movement there. If there is, then sign that the wheel bearings are worn. Check the condition of the tyres as well. So how old are the tyres? Are they fairly recent? Have they gone hard? Are the sidewalls cracked? Are they badly worn? Also, have a look for uneven wear on the tyres. If the wear, on one side is more than the other, that could be a sign of a misalignment somewhere. For instance, a bent frame, something like that, if the bike is running with the wheel slightly out of alignment. So all of the checks I've just talked about for the front wheel, you would do for both wheels. So you want to check the back wheel as well. All exactly the same issues. So that's the wheels. So move on now. I'm trying to be systematic, go through each aspect of the bike systematically. So now move on to the brakes and the cables generally. So what I would do is go and have a look at the levers on the handlebars and check the movement of the levers. If this is a disc brake, so it's hydraulic, but if it's a cable operated brake, you're looking for smooth movement there and for the lever to return properly and fully. Whilst you're checking the levers, you can check the clutch lever as well. Make sure that is smooth movement and not too heavy. And you can feel, there should be a little bit of play in the lever. And get my camera over there. Should be a little bit of play lever before it starts taking up the clutch. So you're checking for that. And then the rear brake, mine's got the brake on the right hand side. Most old British bikes have them on the left hand side, but there's been a later one, it's on the right hand side. Again, you're looking for sensible movement there on the pedal, smooth, works easily and returns properly. And then if possible, you want to hop on the bike, get the bike off the stand, and then just try the brakes, just try them by just pushing the bike forward and applying the brake, and do it independently. Sort of push. When I say put, I just mean rock the bike forward and on the front brake and then on the back brake, just to make sure that they're working. You would obviously need a more thorough test than that by actually taking the bike out for a ride, but we'll come to that. Now this being a later bike, it's got disc brakes, but if you have drum brakes, you'll want to make sure that the lever and the actuation arm are roughly at about 90 degrees. If they're not at 90 degrees, particularly if the angle is wider than 90 degrees, that's a clear indication that there is a lot of wear there on either on the drum or the shoes or both. So again, that's a warning sign that you've got some issues with the brake. If you have cable operated brakes, then you need to check all of the linkages and the cables. If it's hydraulic brakes like this, you need to check the pipes and the master cylinder, and you're looking for evidence there of any leaks or swelling, perishing particularly in the hydraulic lines here. And again, you can test that if with one hand you apply the brake and then the other hand you just hold on to if you can sometimes feel if it is swelling slightly. With cable brakes, then you're looking for evidence of worn damage to the cables and the adjusters and the linkages. Make sure any cleavage pins and split pins are in place where they should be on the braking system. Then finally, just check any other levers. So if you've got a cable operated clutch lever or an advanced retard or something like that, just check all of those, that they move properly, that there's no problem with dry cables, unlubricated cables, freight cables and things. And check the throttle. The throttle should move smoothly, return of its own accord like that, no problem. You know, full smooth movement on the throttle. Let's move on to the suspension then. So next you want to check the suspension. So I would get on the bike if you can, get it off the stand, and then applying the front brake, just bounce the front end. So obviously you can test the front brake and the front suspension at the same time. Now, I talked about the brake earlier. And what you're looking for with the front forks is then that they should operate smoothly up and down without any noises, without any sticking spots on them. And then you know, bounce up and down on the seat to try the rear suspension as well. Then visually inspect the fork stanchions for any evidence of rust or pitting, and then round the seals and, you know, if necessary, lift up these dust covers here to check for any evidence of oil leaks. You'll notice a few spots and things on my bike. It's just because it's raining outside. The bike's just been outside, so it's got a bit of rain on it. But you can see on mine there's just a very, very slight misting of oil on there from the forks. I would then check the steering head bearings for any evidence of wear or poor adjustment. So there's two things you need to have a look at. Have you got full movement from side to side, full smooth movement from side to side, from lock to lock? You know, it helps if you can get the front wheel off the ground to do that. And the other thing is just to check for looseness in the bearings. And the best way to do that is if you get your finger in here, which is just, so you've got your finger, so one side is touching the bottom yoke, or triple clamp if you call it if you're American, bottom yoke here, and then the head tube, and then just pull the front wheel, wobble the front wheel towards yourself and then towards the bike, so you're sort of pushing and pulling, and there should be absolutely no movement there, which I'm pleased to say there's none on mine at all. You should then do a similar check on the rear suspension, checking the swing arm bushes. So the swing arm pivot on my bike is here, so get hold of the rear of the swing arm and try and move that swing arm sideways, pull it towards you, push it away from you, and you know, if you get it right at the end of the swing arm here with the leverage, you should be able to pick up even a small amount of movement on the swing arm bushes here. And again, there's absolutely no movement at all there on mine. Next, I'll move on to the drive chain, the rear drive chain. So what you're interested in here is the chain you know, rusty? Is it poorly lubricated? Because that's another sign of neglect and poor maintenance. But if you've got a well lubricated chain and it's well adjusted as well, check the chain adjustment, make sure it's well adjusted. Again, that's a sign that the bike has been looked after. And whilst you look at it, have a look at the wear on the rear sprocket as well, and if you can get to look at it, the front sprocket, with a lot of bikes you can't actually see that, but at least you can have a look at the rear drive sprocket and see whether there's any signs of wear on it. The next thing I would check is bodywork. So you're looking for rust and damage here. So side panels, the side panels on this bike are plastic, so there's no issue with rust there, but you can look for cracks and damage to the side panels. And then the mud guards. So you can see my mud guards have been painted black. They should be chrome. So you know, previous owner, not me, painted them black. But what you're looking for then is evidence of any damage, dents, rust, things like that. And then check the mounting nuts, the mounting box, the mounting points, all of them for cracks and damage there, because you know, with the vibration, particularly on old British bikes, that's quite commonly a problem. And obviously check the rear mudguard as well. And then with the petrol tank, you want to take off the filler cap and check inside the tank there for any rust. This is where having a flashlight torch useful to have a look, see if there's any rust inside there. And then have a look at the outside of the tank for any physical signs of damage, dents, you know, repairs. And sometimes having a small magnet is useful, because a small magnet will help you pick up where there's been filler, you know, because obviously the magnet won't stick to the filler. Also check underneath the petrol tank to make sure there's the correct straps or mounting bolts there. So you can see there's a strap across there on mine. Nice new stainless steel bolts in there, which I put in recently. And the petrol taps as well. You look in there, you know, are they leaking? The evidence that they're leaking. Are they working properly? Do they work, you know, operate smoothly, properly? Are they replacement ones? You know, if the aftermarket ones are the original ones. Again, whether or not that is an issue just depends on what you're looking for. And then whilst you're down here, have a look at the carburetors. Are they the original spec ones? Are they upgrades? Are they aftermarket? In this case, these are the original spec ones for this bike. It's the AML Mark IIs. And again, you know, whether they are original or upgrades is, you know, it depends on what you're looking for. It's not necessarily an issue, but it's something that you need to be aware of when you're looking at the bike. If you've got a separate oil tank, as I say, this is an oil in the frame one, but if you've got a separate oil tank, usually mounted on the right-hand side here, again, check the condition of the oil tanks, if there's any rust there, any leaks, and then check all of the oil lines. So obviously I can check the oil lines on this. And also another thing to look out for is whether an aftermarket oil filter has been added. That's quite a common upgrade. And, you know, in many cases, that's a positive upgrade. It's a good upgrade. If you watched my other videos, you know I've actually added one to this, but it's one of the internal ones. It replaces the mesh filter inside the bottom of the oil tank, so that's not immediately evident. But a lot of them are on the return feed, so you'll have one, say, you know, mounted down here, or sometimes they're at the front of the engine as an aftermarket on the aftermarket item on the oil return line. So whilst you're looking particularly at the petrol tank, you know, check the paint as well. And again, whether this is important to you or not depends on what you're looking for. But is it original? Mine's not, because I actually had this repainted about 3-4 years ago. But you know, you may be looking for original paint. Does the paint colour match the logbook? So again, have a look at the owner's logbook and see if the paint colour matches the logbook. I have on several occasions bought a bike where the logbook specifies it's a different colour because, you know, replacement tank's been put on, something like that. And then have a look at the seat as well. Look at the condition of the seat. Obviously the cover on this one is nice. There's no tears or rips or cracks or damage in this. But also, if you can, have a look at the seat base. So look how sound that is, you know, whether there's any rust or damage or repair on the signs of repair on the seat base as well. Again, the torch helps. Looking in here, it's a bit dark in there, sorry. Check all the bike electrics, and again, how much they have in the way of electrics and things will depend on how old or how modern the bike is. But with a lot of bikes, you'll need to actually start the engine, and then if it's got indicators, you know, do the indicators work? Does the horn work? Do the lights work? Rear light, brake light. Again, very old bikes may not have a brake light, but you know, check the brake light switch on both the front and the rear brake pedals. You know, if you've got idiot lights as well, you know, check that they are working. You know, again, if you've got lights inside the, you know, lighting up the clocks, you can have a look and see if they're working. Sometimes it's not easy to see that, but just generally check over all the electrics. And it's also worth looking to see whether the bike has been converted to electronic ignition. If it's an older bike that was originally on points, this bike was originally on points, but it's got electronic ignition. You can see the electronic ignition system fitted in here, and that's a brand new battery. I've just put that on about three days ago. Batteries are not that expensive, so I tend not to worry about them too much, but you know, it is worth checking. And if it's an older, you know, acid battery, check the levels, you know, and just look at the physical damage, at any sign of warping of the plates and things like that. And then where you can, just generally check the electric loom over as well. You know, there's quite often not a lot visible, but just try and check the condition of the electric loom generally. Other things that you might want to inquire about are whether the bike comes with a toolkit. You know, is it an original toolkit or is it one that's been put together by the owner? It's worth having a look and see what comes with there. And also whether any spare parts come with the bike. Usually classic bikes come with spare parts, you know, bits that have been replaced or the owner's picked up as spares over time, and you know, that can be very useful picking up those. So that's the checklist that I went through for, you know, just a physical inspection of the bike. The next step, if you can, is to take it out for a test ride. But you know, understandably, many owners do not want you to, you know, go riding off on their bike, or at least they'll want cash in their hand before you take it for a test ride. So if you can't take a test ride, it's not the end of the world, because you are going to have picked up most major issues if you've been able to do the check, the stationary check that I've been through. But there are some things which it helps to be able to take for a test ride. So if you take it out for a test ride, again, you can confirm whether the frame's straight, with the steering straight, whether it's pulling to one side, another. Very important to go up and down all of the gears and make sure that it cleanly changes gear both up the gearbox and down the gearbox. Again, with a test ride, you can try out the brakes and the suspension more dynamically, see what they feel like, and also the smoothness of the throttle and smoothness of the engine. Opening the throttle, and does it pick up smoothly, or is it misfiring, or is it lagging, which would suggest a poor adjustment on the carburetor. So that is it. That's the checklist that I go through when I'm looking to buy a bike. It's not 100% comprehensive. It's very, very difficult to do a 100% comprehensive test, but I think it's a pretty thorough check of the bike, is that, and you're likely to pick up most major issues that are likely to arise. So I just want to finish by talking about what about buying a second-hand bike if it's a newer bike. What other things are important to have a look at? Well, one of them is a lot of more modern bikes are water-cooled. Obviously, there are some water-cooled very old bikes, such as Scots Squirrel and things like that, but older bikes tend to be air-cooled. So whereas more modern bikes tend to be water-cooled because of emission problems. So you just need to check that cooling system. So check the radiator for any damage, sign of leaks, check all of the pipes for cracking, the joins, the Jubilee clips and things. Just check over the cooling system, check the cooling system level, the fluid level as well. And the other thing is, if you are buying a much newer bike, is to look for evidence that wear and tear on the bike that you would not expect from a relatively new bike. If you're buying a vintage or a classic bike that's 40, 60 years old, then there's going to be lots of wear and tear on it. But if you're buying a bike that is only, should we say, 2 or 3 years old, and the owner claims has only done 3,000 miles, does it look like a bike that's only done 2,000-3,000 miles? Is a lot of wear on the foot pegs, scuffs on the paintwork, on the handlebar grips, on the levers, things like that, on the instrument clusters, which would suggest a lot more use and a lot more wear than you would expect from 3,000 miles. And obviously another thing to look at for more recent bikes is evidence of accident damage. That somebody's laid the bike down or piled it into something and then just tried to patch it up to sell it on. But I think a lot of the things in my checklist that I went through, you will pick up that accident damage from things like that. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. If you are wondering about buying a classic bike, maybe it will give you a little bit more confidence. I will reiterate, the checklist that I went through is available for you to download and print off. It's a 3-page checklist, so it's quite a comprehensive checklist. There's the link in the description to this video. It's totally free. Go and download it if it's going to be useful to you. Thank you very much for watching. Ride safe. Hopefully see you again soon. Bye.